Welcome to the Kiefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Kiefer. In this installment, we're going to take a look at how I mounted the floor and the body on these Chromoly mounting plates, as well as how I made this hoop to mount the 4-link suspension brackets to. So the way this car is set up, using stock brake pedal and stock position throttle pedal, I didn't want to put the main hoop very far back, since the seat, which is just laying to the side here so I can get to these tubes for right now, won't be very far back. It'll actually be pretty close to stock position. It'll be a little lower, just so make sure we clear the roof stuff with the driver's helmet. But with that being the case, for the rear 4-link brackets, they had to be further back than the #1 rear cross member that they'll typically mount to. I had to create this tube to space that out. The car's not going to be sitting extremely low, so that was another objective of this hoop, was to actually move the mounting locations for the suspension brackets down. So this hoop moves the mounting point for the bracket down 3 inches. And actually, the way the Tin Soldier brackets I'm using are, they measure off of the rear surface of the tube. And the way this chassis is laid out, from the center line of this #1 rear cross member to the outside edge of this rear tube is 8 inches. All right, I'm going to start bending the piece to make that extension hoop that I'm planning to mount the rear suspension brackets to. So I've already got my piece cut out, and I'm going to make a nice mark on this, bend it 90 degrees, stopping and measuring along the way, and I'm going to see exactly how far from my mark the outside edge of the tubing ends up. So I made my bend and figured out that the distance is pretty much exactly 8 inches from the start of the bend to the crown of the bend. But apparently, when the bender says I've gone 88 degrees, I've actually gone about 93. So that really blows. But the good thing is, I've figured out what kind of length I will need center to center on this hoop, and it's about 7 3/4 of an inch. So my notch will, see, I'm going to line it up to here to measure, because that's definitely going to be part of the hoop, and this definitely won't. It looks like my notch will have to be ahead of where it bends too far. Maybe it'll go about there, somewhere in there. It'll be centered at, like I said, the end of the notch will be at 7 3/4. So I've got my measurement, and I've measured 8 inches over from kind of the crown of that part of the bend, and I'm going to measure the width of the entire hoop minus 16, or 2 times 8, and so then I'll know what my straight needs to measure and where to start my second bend to make up that last 8 inches. All right, so gonna get my 0 off of the bending die, and now I'm gonna set this up on the tube and adjust it to read the same angle. And I can also use the trick with the straight edge and just kind of look at it and going across there. Well, at least I nailed the width, but my angles weren't even close to being right. I don't know, but it's all right. I only need about this much of this thing, and it lines up really nice. All right, so I've measured the angle of bend here and discovered that it's right about 92 degrees. And what I'm doing is I'm setting the tube notcher up to this angle, and I'm also marking where I need to make the notch. I've figured out that center to center this thing needs to be a little over 7 3/4 of an inch, and that also means that edge to edge, like outside edge of the tube to outside edge of the notch, it's the same radius, so it translates over. So what I'm doing is measuring this out from the outside straight edge. I've measured over about 7 13/16 just to give it a little bit extra and provide some material for cleanup, just to get everything nice and smooth and ready to weld together. When I grab this in the tube notcher, I want to set it up so it's not cutting at that angle, but rather at the angle that matches the flat edge of this hoop here. Alright, I've got the notcher all set up. I've got this kind of against the bearing block of the notcher shaft, and you can see I've got maybe 3/16 or so of an inch of clearance there, and if I compare that to my mark where the notch goes on the other side, I've got about the same. So that thing's pretty nice and straight. I've also set it up level and use the magnetic base dial level to get everything set up. Alright, I've got this thing all set up for the second notch. Got it aimed right down the barrel at that first one. Alright, got both sides notched, and this one's looking like it's about 7 13/16. And I'm about to set up and measure the other side. Well, looking at this side, it is super in the shadow here, but it's looking right at 7 13/16. All right. Well, that's looking pretty sweet. Notches look good. And this thing looks pretty dang even. But I need to make a pair of tubes. I'm going to use 1 5/8, full size tubing to connect those up. But my suspension brackets are going to mount there and there, and that'll be all tied in, and it should be pretty nice and pretty strong. I've got the ends of that hoop I bent here, which I left enough to make those pieces with. All right, I've got my second piece all set up in the notcher here. I've got my angle and my tilt set up. Use that little piece of tube and the dial level, and I'm lined up against my inside dimension mark here, and I'm about to oil this thing up and notch it. Got to make a mirror counterpart to this tube. I got it all notched and cleaned up and fitted. It's looking good, so hopefully here in a little bit I'll have a nice pair of them. right, sweet. Got both of those little pieces in there. Gaps look pretty good. I've got them, I started to clean them up and they're deburred. I just need to clean the insides of all these tubes and make sure everything's squared up and good to go. It looks like it's going to be nice for mounting my suspension brackets on either side there and transferring all that load into my main chassis here. Alright, got all the vent holes poked and deburred, and I just need to polish this stuff up and clean it off and mount everything back together. Give this hoop a couple of tacks, and then I'll position the little connectors there that are sitting up there in, and go ahead and tack those in. Tack the hoop in and check the measurements. Everything looks good. I'm going to put a couple more tacks on the hoop and then get those extension bars in there. Got the hoop and the extension tubes on. Tack the top up, flipped it over, and just got the bottom all tacked up. It's looking good. Worked on getting those extension tubes straight for a little bit. Had to get them just right. Want them nice and straight so they transfer that power from the rear suspension nice and axially into the rest of the chassis. Alright, well, I've got a Chromoly sheet here. It's 4130 of 125, and I've got a 6-inch strip marked out, and it's time to get cutting. I'm going to make my mounting plates for the chassis that go on the rockers out of this, and they need to be 6 inches by 6 inches at least, so I'm going to start with a strip and then cut pieces off that are appropriate for me to shape onto the car. Alright, so I'm making my mounting plate here. These will go on the rockers towards the rear of the floor structure of the chassis, and they will attach like that, or like this to the rockers, and they'll weld to the bottom of the rocker. This is just a piece of the Chromoly plate I'm making these from here, but just to demonstrate how I want to mount them. So to close in the gaps on the sides, I made these plates here, which I'm about to weld on the bench into those little gaps there. Alright, so I've made the plates that will weld to the car and the roll cage will mount to. Specifically, the floor structure will mount to these. These go in the rear, kind of on either side of the main rear cross member, the number 1 bar, and then these go on either corner in the front where the 6A and 6B tow bars attach, and they're all upside down. I've weld through primered the back of these. I'll be weld through primering exactly where they land on the car when it's time to weld them on, just to prevent any corrosion inside there. So it's a 6 by 6 inch plate, just like these. These are bent 6 inches by 6 inches as required by the rules. But these have additional kind of triangles. This one's a little more complicated for the driver's side, but they will rest up against the firewall and tie into that. Alright, well, I've got the locations for the plates all primered up with weld through primer, and everything's ready to start welding together. I think I've got the spots for the rear plates primered also, so it's ready to go. I've got the mounting plates tacked up in the car. And now I'm getting ready to trim the floor structure to fit between those. Taking a lot of careful measurements of the floor and the firewall, which I've trimmed for the tubing. Might have a little bit more to go, but I want to be careful and sneak up on it so that I don't have a big gap to weld. But I'm about to trim the ends of these tubes off to length and try to stick this in the car. Alright, I've got vent holes all drilled and deburred in the plates. Everything polished up. I'm gonna start getting ready to stick the floor in here. Alright, sweet. Got the floor structure jammed in there and just stuck it in for the first time. It's pretty close. I've got to just take a little bit more off of the firewall on both sides so that it can move forward. It's going to be centered on that plate and that plate. After I trimmed the ends of the tube and got the floor structure exactly where I wanted it using the floor jack, I went ahead and tacked it to the plates to hold it in place while I build the rest of the chassis. And since it's just tacked, I can cut it loose later to pull the chassis out of the car for final welding. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed this look into putting the floor structure and rear suspension mounting hoop into the car, and I hope you join us next time when we take a look at how to build this main hoop. Thanks for watching. I would be honored if you'd like and subscribe. See y'all again soon. So this hoop moves the mounting point for the bracket down 3 inches and back from the center line of the #1 rear cross member 8 inches.